Good day. I will guide you through the MidiEngine 3 API and how to interact with it using blueprints. Let's move over to the blueprints. This is how you create a MIDI music session at runtime. If you want to create a music session at runtime, add MIDI notes, add MIDI tracks, and create MIDI patterns, this is the API. There are several functions you can call. The first one is to create a music session. Before adding MIDI elements, you can call the static function new music session. It's a static function and doesn't need to be connected to anything. You just need to supply it with an outer, so give it a name. By default, this function will create a single pattern for you to place MIDI notes on. For that pattern, it will ask you how many default tracks you want and to choose the default channels. This method is more of a guided creation process. There is a second method you can use, which is construct music session. You can use construct object from the class and then choose the music session. In C++, this is equivalent to new object, which performs all the steps that the static function does. After creating the music session, create a new MIDI pattern, give it a name, and specify the number of MIDI tracks to create. By default, you can add 0, but if you add 4, it will create 4 empty MIDI tracks that you can add notes to. Even if you add 0, you can still call the new MIDI track function to add MIDI notes into the MIDI pattern. I will cover channels in a different video because they are a separate topic related to the virtual instrument that interacts with the metasounds. To summarize, create a music session, then create a new MIDI pattern. You can call the new MIDI pattern function from the new music sessions. If you create a new MIDI pattern, you'll find it available to add a new MIDI track. Moving on to the loop, I'm adding a MIDI note at each beat. This loop runs from beat 1 to 5. The index is 1 to 5 converted to a beat, and each MIDI note has a duration of 1 beat. This is equivalent to adding a note at each beat. One beat starts at beat 1, another at beat 2, and so on, up to beat 5. This code is equivalent to the code shown here. When adding new MIDI notes, one useful tool is the time utilities functions. If you type time utilities, you get various conversion functions. For example, to convert bars to beats, enter 4 and plug it into your start beat because you want to add a note at the start of bar 4. You can always get your time signature from your music session. Use these conversion functions as needed. Some require the time signature, some don't. Ensure you use the appropriate functions for time conversions by referring to time utilities. Additionally, I want to show you something. All the functions I'm calling here are being invoked by the music session editor. If I place a breakpoint at the new MIDI track function, placing the breakpoint here, you'll see that when I press the Add Track button, the function is called. So I'm calling these API functions at runtime because this is play in editor.